Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Write Books. I'm Mike Craddy, the head of writing at Butterdocs, as it says below my name. Butterdocs is the perfect app for writing your novel. It's what I'm using to write my novel, and you can learn more about Butterdocs at the link below. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, George Jreije, a fantasy author, book editor, author coach, all the things that have to do with writing. He's your man. George, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So on today's episode, we're going to be talking about writing fantasy novels for adolescent audiences. And I'm excited to get George's thoughts on that and just kind of like how he approaches it, that specific genre and his kind of writing process in general. And then we're going to do some timed writing sprints where we can work on our own novels. And during the breaks between the sprints, we can answer some writing questions from the chat. And then later, I'm going to show a little thing we like to do here. It's kind of like the flower or plant of the week. And I got a little video from my garden that I'm going to show. But before we get into it, I want to know where are you? What kind of book are you writing? And kind of a writer question to get us a jumping off point for today to get the creative juices rolling are how much are you thinking about your intended audience as you write? So where are you? What kind of book are you writing? And how much are you thinking about your intended audience as you write? Minaru, welcome from the Midwest. Juno from Massachusetts. And George, of course, jump into the chat. And George, you said you're in Maine, right?
Yeah, I'm in Portland, Maine. It's
Fantastic.
beautiful. It's finally not freezing, which is awesome.
I love that, like your definition probably of not freezing and my definition of not freezing in Los Angeles are probably very, very different.
Very likely.
Yeah. So what I think we can ask a question. What kind of are you working on a book right now, George? You mentioned you actually have a book coming out really soon, right?
Yes. So Bashir Butros in the Jewels of the Nile is a handful. It's a long title. My titles have been very long historically. That comes out May 27th. So it's kind of like Percy Jackson meets Arab culture. And that's not what I'm working on because folks who know publishing know I'd have to have finished that a year ago. But I'm definitely working on the follow-up to that novel, and I'm also working on a graphic novel for next year.
Fantastic. Have you done graphic novels before?
I've written short graphic novels, but never a full graphic novel to be published. Of course, the script is finished for the first one, and so I'm working on the second one already.
Awesome. Great. So, and I am in Los Angeles, and I'm working on a book right now, which is about three estranged best friends from high school who are come back for their 20th high school reunion, not because they're happy to see each other, but because there is a secret from their past that is going to be exposed and sort of explode their lives. So that's what I'm working on. And our writer question, George, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. How much are you thinking, as someone who writes specifically for, is the technical term middle grade audiences? Yeah. First off, can you define what that means, and how much are you thinking about that audience as you write?
Yeah, for children's literature, defining an audience is actually quite simple. It really is predicated on the age of your character. And so if your character is aged between, say, 10 and 12, 10 and 13, they fall into the middle grade category. If they're 14 to 18, it's young adult.
Gotcha.
And so as far as the audience, right, there are three audiences with children's literature, I would say. And it differs from adult literature just a little bit, because with children's literature, you're of course writing for the readers, the young readers who will ultimately pick your books off of a shelf. You're writing for yourself, as you always should be writing for with anything, because especially with children's literature, if you're not enjoying what you're writing, that's going to reveal itself in the prose. And sometimes with adult literature and in certain genres, you can get away with having prose that is so beautiful that, it gets away from the reader kind of how you might have felt. But with children's literature, it's very much not the case that you can get away with just being a great writer and not having a fantastic story. The kids will suss that out right away. And so you always have to be thinking about yourself and you enjoying what you're writing as an audience member. And the third audience, and this is unique to children's literature, is the adults who are the gatekeepers, because kids don't run around with credit cards buying books. So you're always thinking and making sure that your stories are going to pass through that initial gatekeeper to get to your ultimate intended audience.
Do you find, are there trade-offs as you're thinking about those three audiences? Are there things you're like, oh, this one audience would like this more, but the other one won't?
Yeah, I think the goal is to try and minimize some of those trade-offs and not compromise, but there are definitely times where you have to give and take a little bit. So obviously the way that kids are and the way that we were as kids, we might swear, for example, with our friends. That's not finding its way into the literature, right? And so, you can try and be as realistic as possible in the way that kids talk and the way that you might talk, because then it sounds authentic. But you also have to temper yourself a little bit, especially in tense moments that you're writing or otherwise. You have to be very judicious, especially in this day and age, unfortunately, when there's a lot of book banning and schools being very particular about what books they want to carry. Same with libraries, same with bookstores.
Interesting. This question from Juno here, kind of on this subject, George, particularly for the young audiences. How do you know if you're writing something beyond their tastes? How scary is too scary? How complex is too complex? And have you ever been surprised by where the line is on those questions?
Yeah, while the line is fairly rigid, it does move from time to time. And I like to think that across the decades, it has been pushed and moved from when, children's literature was, let's say, Tom Sawyer, to what it is today. The rigidity applies to a lot of kind of basic principles that you can just apply. So, for example, folks often ask me to define the difference between middle grade and young adult. And besides kind of the voice, the character voice, and more young adult having a little more inner monologue and rumination, with middle grade, you got to crank back the dial when it comes to violence. And so you can imply violence and note that violence occurs, but you can't really show the gory details. You can get away with that a little bit in young adult, which has experienced the most in terms of shifts over the past 20 years, thanks to books like The Hunger Games being so mainstream. Same with middle grade. You can say you can imply curses, and you can say words like ass or something like that on occasion. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this.
That's fine. We're on YouTube. Yeah.
Okay. I won't swear too much.
Yeah.
But that's as bad as it gets for me. So I had a friend who published their novel and used the word ass, and I was shocked that it got through the powers that be in publishing. And it tells you just how silly some of these curses that were limited by are. But with middle grade novels, you have to temper yourself in that regard as well with the language. And so in terms of how scary is too scary, or how complex is too complex, I wouldn't worry about complexity. Kids are quite keen and able to understand, especially the middle grade audience, what you're trying to relay. If it's too complex for an adult, it's going to be obviously too complex for a kid. In terms of how scary is too scary, you can go full on. I don't know who your favorite horror author is these days. I really like Tenerife Dew. And you can go full scary, but you can't show the gore and the violence in that. You have to, imply it with middle grade. And so I would say that's the only expectation.
When you're kind of tempering those aspects, are you doing that in your kind of initial draft, or is that something that kind of happens in the revisions where you dial in those levels?
Yeah, everything masterful when it comes to writing happens in the revisions, I like to think. But I will say that as you write more novels and as you revise more drafts, things will become automatic. And so my first drafts do tend to capture a lot of that nuance these days in a way that it took maybe 3 or 4 drafts to capture 5 years ago.
Awesome. Got some fantasy writers here in the book. Teji from San Jose writing a fantasy novel aimed at older YA. Nisi's writing something in the lower YA that seems more your wheelhouse. The 13-year-old protagonist, a portal fantasy, always thinking about my audience. And Marlet joining from Barcelona. Awesome. We got people from all over the world. This is fantastic. So obviously in fantasy, I think one of the first things people think of, which may be actually why some people initially are drawn to writing fantasy, is the world building aspect of it. I think people who are, maybe playing Dungeons and Dragons or into other kind of world building things. I'm curious, how important to you is the world building in fantasy compared to other aspects of the story or of the book, as in like character and plot?
So this might shock some of you in the audience, but the answer is less important, right? Because you can have, and I see this quite often. So I'm a teacher with Gotham Writers Workshop. I teach their science fiction fantasy courses. I teach science fiction and fantasy writing with other organizations as well. But what I see is, students have done so much wonderful work with their world building and their lore. They're kind of like Tolkien, put it in the years, kind of crafting these wonderful worlds.
They have their PhDs and
at Oxford, right? No,
yes.
Was Tolkien Oxford or Cambridge? I can't remember.
Yeah, it was that group of them all. I get a mixed
one
up.
One of those colleges.
Yeah,
one of those two. Very fancy.
Yes.
But the issue with dwelling too much on that is you have to make sure you balance it with good storytelling, because if you can, this obviously applies to all stories, whether you're writing a script or a novel, if you can't communicate what the story is and what the character arcs are, which is the most crucial element of a story, how the characters change from beginning to end, readers aren't going to sit down and indulge you for hundreds of pages to get to the world building. It doesn't matter how cool your world building is. And so make sure your world building is awesome, and make sure it's, of course, streamlined and makes sense, that you're not contradicting yourself with your magic systems and otherwise. But more importantly, ask yourself, are my character arcs clear? Does everything that happened in the plot matter to the story? Is my prose succinct? Does it communicate what I'm trying to communicate? And so when you have the craft elements down, okay, now you can really allow readers to enjoy your world building.
Are there ways or techniques in which you can use the world building to enrich those other elements instead of competing with space? Like use the world building to enrich character, enrich the story?
Yeah, especially with character. And when I teach, I teach that character informs world building. And so you work from, okay, what do I want, or how do I want my character to change? And how can elements in the world building inspire conflict, which will force them to grow? How can it make sense from a backstory perspective that the character is in a place at the beginning of the story that you want them to be, so that they can then grow from there? So they actually go hand in hand, but you just have to make sure that you're not building the world in a vacuum without thinking about the characters themselves. And so I do think that world building complements character, but it has to have character as part of the equation.
I have this thing where I don't know how you feel about this, because I used to particularly read a lot of fantasy, and then I kind of got burnt out a little bit because I felt like there was a lot of bad fantasy out in the world. And I kind of had this rule of thumb where, like, if I was reading the first page and there were like, I can't remember what my number was, but if on the first page there were like 5 or 10 made up words, that like I would put it down. Like it would, like if it was just like the first page was just like an onslaught of just imaginary things, that I'm just like, it's too much. Like I need to like get into the story and like get to know this character before like I can have all of the other stuff that I can tell the author is so excited about, because they spent so much time like developing all these things that they just want to share it all. But I'm like, I don't know. I guess there's maybe the question buried in here is, how do you know whether the thing that's exciting to you, because you invested all your time working on it, is going to be exciting for your audience, your readers?
Yeah. So I want to backtrack just a little bit to what you said about like having too much of the world building right up front. Obviously, you don't want to include info dumps or start with them. Like you don't want to do like the Star Wars thing where it's like telling you everything that's been happening right up front. You want readers to kind of slowly unravel and discover that as the story progresses. But think of it this way, right? if you are writing a story, and I say this as a person whose first language was Arabic, not English. If you're writing a story and you want to include another language, imagine it's not even fantasy, right? You don't go in and just start including vast swaths of that other language and expect readers to keep up. You want to provide context and grounding so they can understand these terms and these concepts that you're introducing in the other language. The same is true with fantasy or science fiction world building, right? You want to ease readers into it so they can understand and provide context. You don't need to directly translate what things are. Just make sure that through the context they understand that, oh, this word is a type of weapon or something of that nature, right? You have the character swinging it in a training, a battle training or something of that nature. And so you want to make sure that you are delivering that information in a way that makes sense, because that's the first way in which you can guarantee the reading will be, to your question, engaging, as opposed to tiring to read. You don't want to exhaust your readers or make them pause like the reading experience and go and like Google terms and concepts, right? That's the last thing you want to do. You want to keep the eyes on the pages. And so, aside from that, in terms of making sure it's engaging, again, it has to be engaging for you to write. Mm-hmm. And then you also, as readers, you have to get feedback on the work and share it with other writers who hopefully are at a similar stage, or who might be professionals, for example.
It's funny you mentioned the context thing about vocabulary, and it just reminds me of, there's so many words that I don't know the definition to, but I just sort of understand what they mean just because I came across them in a book in context. And it's like, I know this word and I might even be able to use it, but if someone were to actually ask me what the definition of the word is, I wouldn't exactly know. I'm like, I don't know. I never know the definition. I just learned this word in a book, like 20 years ago. And I get kind of what it means from context.
I'm the same way. Like in that, my wife will hear me say a word and be like, what are you saying? Because I, again, as a non-native English speaker originally, learned the words through reading. And so I never learned the pronunciations of words, but I know what they are and what they mean and how to use them in conversation. And so I'll say it in a conversation. And she'll be like, no, that's not how you say it at all. So I get that.
I had this thing where for like the first half of my life, like the word chic, as in like trendy and cool. Sure. I thought that was different than the word chick, CHIC, because I had like read it and I was like, yeah, chick. And I'm like, no, these are just two different words that mean almost the same thing. And then suddenly I was like, wait, you pronounce that chic? That's what I thought. Chic was like SHEEK or something, like something. And then chick was also cool, like hip, it's chick. And then I remember just like my mind being blown, and I'm like, wait, these are actually the same word. Oh, and we got the info. Tolkien went to Oxford.
Thank you, Minaru.
So we know. So we've talked about characters. Are there specific kinds of characters beyond the age of the character matching up with the audience that you're writing for? Are there certain kinds of characters that work well in middle grade fantasy novels?
Yeah, absolutely. Your main character, your protagonist, always has to be within the age range that you're writing for when it comes to middle grade. But the colorful assortment of, other characters don't have to be. One thing that is often compelling, though, is having a villain who is of the same age as the character, because that adds that dimension of, and that challenge of, how can I write a villain who is, as compelling as some of these adult fantasy villains while being in that age. And so I'll just give the example of Bashir Butros, that upcoming novel, where the twist is that the villain, because the premise is a boy finds a genie in a ring at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, and the ring, the genie, belonged to Aladdin, who is called Ali Adin in this story, and he's a demon. So it's like if Aladdin was the villain, he was corrupted by the power of the ring. And so I made Aladdin an immortal demon who happens to look like a 13-year-old. And so that's my way of kind of like, how can I level the playing field so it's kind of the same age. So that's one thing I like to think about in terms of characters. How can I surround this middle grade age character with characters that are around his age? Because if it's him or them or whoever, your protagonist is, in a story with a bunch of adults, that doesn't really fly with middle grade readers. They want to be immersed and feel like they might be amongst peers in this challenge amongst peers. Of course, don't shy away from including adults. And to that point, another kind of fun trope to play with is the mentor figure, right? And so that's kind of my favorite trope to work with in terms of characters, and those are usually adults, and usually adults who don't want to be mentors.
The reluctant mentor is one of the most fun characters, I think, in all of literature. Yeah,
especially kids, because kids can be exhausting. I spend a lot of time visiting schools and talking to kids, and I find myself, when kids are bombarding me with questions like, I can be done with this right now. And of course, I love doing it. My sister's a school teacher, and she'll say the same thing. And so I really find a lot of catharsis in the mentor figure. So that's especially a character that I enjoy playing around with in my novels.
That's funny. I was visiting a friend recently, and he has 4 kids, aged from like 4 to 10. And, it was like they were very shy when I first got there. I hadn't seen them in like 5 years. I'd even met some of them before. And then we were eating dinner together, and we were starting talking about like Avatar, The Last Airbender, which they were like really into. And I just started.
That's a good sign right off the bat.
Yeah. And I just started asking them questions about it. And then, like, slowly they were opening up. And it got to the point where all 4 of them were just standing around me, screaming Avatar facts, like at my face. And it was just so funny, like, as they like opened up. It was really fun. But getting back to character, for these kind of, adolescent protagonists, how do you develop kind of their problem or the central question or their goal that's going to be driving the story forward?
So imagine it's like an adult, like to take the age category out of this. This applies to all age categories. But when you think about the way a character changes throughout the novel, it's driven by an external problem, but also an internal problem. And so you ask yourself, what is this belief that this character might have at the beginning of the story, or a character trait? For example, they're scared of, going outside of their comfort zone, right? How can I put them in positions across the story that will force them to do so and also make them comfortable? And so I've established what that kind of initial state of the character is. And I've established that because of this initial state, I want them to change and become the opposite of that, which is timid in this case. And let me also tackle another element that you see in adult fantasy and also sometimes in children's literature, like villain arcs. We love a good villain. And so I'll have students or clients often ask me, hey, I don't know that this applies, that having a character journey or character arc, because my character is getting worse. And in truth, it's the same situation. If the character is getting worse, there has to be a reason for it. There has to be an impetus. There has to be a conflict that is forcing them to take on these changes, this regression, that such that as readers, we get why they're becoming the character they need to be by the end. And so you just have to make sure, because your readers will want a basis for your character doing what they're doing throughout the novel. If all of their actions are random, that's not going to be compelling to read. You want to make sure that you are thinking through a journey, and it's not a linear journey because, as growth is often up and down, but ultimately that they're changing in a way that they are a transformed character by the end. And that's all you got to keep in mind, no matter what age category you're writing in. SHAH HADID, which is my debut novel, his overarching changes, he believed he could do everything on his own in the beginning, and by the end he learned to rely on his cast of friends, his cast of the other side characters in the novel to overcome this massive problem that we've created for him. And in Bashir Butros, it is more like the timid kind of not wanting to get out of his shell, not believing that he's good enough, to kind of feeling more confident so that he can embrace his values, which are nonviolence. And nonviolence is a really tricky one to navigate in a fantasy novel. So kind of like Aang in The Last Airbender, since you brought it up. Though we know Aang does actually kill people unintentionally, it's kind of a meme. But, we try here in this novel.
So you talk about the internal, I always talk about internal, external goals. I love that. I always think of like external, what do they want? Internal, why do they want it? That kind of thing. But one thing I talk about in writing is that you have to put them in situations for those questions to matter, right? So you have to have the sort of the plot journey informing the character journey. How do you approach that as an author? How do you kind of use the plot to take the character on their emotional journey as they're going on maybe an actual journey in the story?
Sure. So I think I start from a character level and I start from a high concept level. I'm like, okay, kid finds a genie in a ring, and everybody wants this ring because the genie is the powerful. I'm saying genie right now. It's really pronounced Jinn. But he finds this Jinn in a ring. Everyone wants the Jinn because of the Jinn's power, and so he's being pursued by this Aladdin type figure, but also these other creatures who are attracted to that power. And so already I started with a high concept that is going to create conflict. And so I think to myself, what are like maybe 3 or 4 major points of conflict that can not only challenge Bashir, but also force him to confront this kind of way of being or belief that he has at the beginning of the story. And so from there, I'll map out the conflict. And I'm as somebody who is a writer, I'm more of a pantser than a plotter. And so I don't want to make, a 20-page synopsis that tells you all that's going to happen. And you don't have to, right? But at a very high level, I'll just note like, okay, here's a really cool conflict that can happen. Here's another really cool conflict that can happen. Oh, what if this happens here? And the plan might change, it might not. But at least I know at a high level the overarching challenges where Bashir will either succeed or fail, but will ultimately learn from those things and use that growth because it's all in service of the climax, right? That major moment at the end where he has to, or your character will have to learn what they have taken from their journey and apply it in order to overcome this overarching conflict.
So you mentioned a little bit about your outline. You said you're more of a pantser than a plotter. As you're writing, though, how much outlining are you doing in advance, and are you kind of rewriting that as you go? What is your approach to sort of figuring out your big structure kind of moments?
Sure. And I don't want to be disingenuous. One thing that I will say is I do plot sometimes. And with, for example, graphic novels, you have to plot everything up front because it would be a pain in the butt if you were to literally illustrate the whole graphic novel and discover that you have to actually go back and gut it. That would just waste too much time. So there are certain modes of writing that you do have to be a plotter, whether you like it or not. And I will say the other time we have to be a plotter is in traditional publishing where I'm working with HarperCollins and they say, hey, George, we want a book 2. You have like a year to write it. I don't have the luxury of spending months and months thinking about the story, going in, making major revisions, whatever. So at those times, I do actually write the 10-page synopsis and make sure I have a game plan. To your question about, how much do I plot while writing? Oftentimes, I'll have, what I know to be the internal motivation, right? That kind of interchange that will happen throughout the story. And from there, I will kind of think through some of those plot points as mentioned. But I often will, I'll be writing, right? I'll have the document open, the butter doc open. And I will, at the bottom, just bullet point a lot of like things I want, Bashir or whatever character to explore, plot points that I think are like really awesome. And other things that I might think of. It's very informal. It's literally just like at the bottom of a document, bolded, just a bunch of info about like what I think can happen in the future and why. And that will be kind of a North Star because it's always helpful for when I next sit down to write. You can overcome a lot of like that initial, like I know someone in the chat mentioned writer's block. You can overcome a lot of that just by knowing the first step, right? The first thing you're going to start writing next. And so whenever I'm at the end of a writing session, I'll just sit down and be like, where am I going with this? Like, what do I think is the next plot point? And just knowing that, kind of like that flashlight in the dark forest, helps you so much.
Interesting. Do you have any other writer's block techniques while we're on that subject?
Yeah. Whenever I encounter writer's block, I feel like that's my heart telling me that something is wrong from the story. It may be from a craft perspective, it may be the vibes are off. And so I'll literally go in and just flip something on its head or throw a curveball at my main character and make them overcome a new conflict. Or go back and just be like, hey, if I have to go back and cut 100 pages, not 100 words, to make this work, I'll do that. And I have done it in the past. And what it does is now I feel good about the story again. I've overcome the writing block, and I can now actually write at a pace that is quicker than when I was trying to just push through it by writing. And so I often take that as a gut check.
That's interesting, because oftentimes for me, writer's block hits when I just feel exhausted, when it just suddenly feels hard. And I think that is interesting to take that the next step. It feels hard probably because something's not working right now. And so it's like so for me, writer's block is a resistance to like the level of effort it's going to require to move forward. Because I'm just like, oh, my brain's tired and something's wrong here, and I have to figure out what it is. So that's an interesting kind of taking that as a gut check. I like that.
Yeah, writing is hard, and we sometimes as writers gaslight ourselves into thinking, oh, just keep pushing through and it'll all work out. And sometimes that is the case, but very often it's like something is wrong and we're just like internally too lazy to go back and want to fix it. And writer's block is, I think, the creative brain's way of saying, no, you're not gonna make as much progress as you want until you actually fix this thing.
That's awesome. I want to go quickly from kind of the macro to the micro. How do you approach scene writing? Do you have specific elements in a scene or ways you approach or think about scene writing to make a compelling scene that's going to keep the reader engaged and kind of keep the story moving forward?
Yeah, every scene, as I mentioned before, has to matter in a story. And so I'm not writing a scene just because I think it's cool. I'm writing a scene because I'm asking myself the question, what is the conflict I can give my character in this scene? Even if it's just like a verbal argument, if the scene is dialogue heavy and not action heavy, what is the conflict I can include in the scene that will challenge my character or characters? And so that is always my North Star. I always think in terms of, in a scene, what I want to have happen is I want to introduce what is happening. I want to introduce a conflict, and I want to have the character react to that conflict. Now, in terms of the rumination and about their growth or what has happened, that can come later in a different scene. But in every scene, there has to be at least those three things: grounding in the story. I don't assume that a reader knows what has always been happening in the past. I'm sometimes assuming that, hey, in a new scene or in a new chapter, maybe the reader took a pause. And so I'm trying to find ways to organically, not heavy-handedly, include a grounding and then introduce a conflict.
Interesting. I love that. A couple questions. Juno's asking, what kind of stories do you feel like fantasy is best equipped to explore?
Really anything and everything. The beauty of fantasy is that you can play a lot with allegory. And sometimes humans struggle to be told lessons. They don't want to hear it. And that's normal. The same is true for kids, but I think it's actually more true for adults. The beauty of fantasy is it allows us to allegorically express these lessons in a way that is smart and in a way that, they are being imparted, this wisdom. And so any question that you really want to explore deeply or any lesson that you want to impart, fantasy, I think, is often a better conduit than contemporary novels. That's just my take. So I don't think there's a limitation on what you can explore. Fantasy readers are quite savvy. And as a writer, you have to be very savvy because you're balancing that with the world building as well.
Awesome. One more question before we jump into our first writing sprint. How easy is it for you to transition between prose writing and your graphic novel writing?
It's not too hard. Graphic novel writing is literally like writing a screenplay. It's script writing. You're writing a script. And so you do have to think from a developmental perspective about the holistic story. The execution comes in the prose, where you're just sitting down and you're writing, okay, page 1, panel 1. And then you're including what's happening. It's a little more tedious to write graphic novels than to write prose novels, but you have to be kind of patient because I think what you get as an end product is just as satisfying, if not more satisfying, than the actual prose novel. So it's more of like, as a writer for graphic novels, it's an act of love. With prose writing, you get to indulge yourself a little bit more.
That's awesome. All right, let's jump into our first writing sprint, guys. We're gonna do a 25-minute writing sprint. Now, oftentimes we'll have themed writing sprints. For this one, I like, George, what you were talking about. Maybe you could just kind of refresh us right before we go into this. You're saying the 3 elements of scene writing. You said grounding, introduce a conflict. What could you kind of recap that? I think that's kind of maybe a good focus for this writing sprint.
Yeah. So ground us in the scene, introduce the conflict. The less the character expects it, the better, and have the character react to the conflict, and make sure when they react to the conflict, it's in accordance with where they are developmentally in the story. So how they have been changing, or if they haven't been changed at all, where they are at the beginning developmentally, internally.
That's awesome. I love it. All right, great. So I'm gonna put the 25-minute timer up. We're gonna play some music. George and I are gonna be tiny off to the side and muted. And we're just gonna work on whatever novels we're here to work on. And if you have more questions, drop them in the chat. And maybe after this sprint, we can answer a few more before George has to head out. So let me just get us going here. 5 minutes on the clock. Let's get into it, everybody. Happy writing. Let's do it. right, and that brings us to the end of our first sprint, the first 25-minute sprint. George, George, can you unmute? There you go. You're unmuted now. Sorry, I was trying to unmute you, but it wouldn't let me. I want to welcome everyone who joined during that sprint. This is Let's Write Books. We have a special guest, George Jreije, with us. We are talking about writing fantasy for adolescent audiences. Let me know how that sprint went for everyone. Are the muses with us today? Are they blessing your fingertips? Are they angry at you for some reason? Anything you're particularly dealing with? Get in the chat and let us know. George, how'd that sprint go for you?
Really productive. Really, I had a good time doing some revisions. So
Awesome.
yeah, definitely use my own advice there.
It was a little bit of a struggle for me. I'm gonna be honest. Getting into it took me a while. As a primarily a screenwriter, when I'm working on my novel, I find that my prose muscles have just atrophied from, when I used to write more short stories. There's more in that flow. And, in screenwriting, it's all about economy of your lines and like minimal description. And so when and I feel like there's just different tools and using your kind of voice and tone. So when I'm writing, I just find struggling a little bit with my prose. I don't know. So it was a little tough for me.
Yeah, I mean, I find that if you give yourself grace and you just push through in that regard, the more you write, the more you're gonna kind of get your mojo back.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably true. Is that like I just sort of need to be like these early chapters are just going to be very bad, and like they're going to be rewritten, multiple times before they resemble anything that's going to be good. Checking in with the chat, Barbara, a little foggy, but it picked up for her. Amy Lane, absorbing info today, illustrating to process. The stress of everything has been getting to me, so this is great. Love it. Yeah, I love when your writing can be a little bit of a creative break from the world. If anyone has any other questions for George before we lose him in a minute, please get in the chat and let us know. A couple announcements. Well, just one mainly. Next week we're doing Let's Write Books, or I'm doing it at the same time, and we're going to be talking about stakes. And so get in the description. There's a link if you want to RSVP for that. It's going to be fun. And let's see here. Kara didn't get a high word count, but that was my goal. The story's been a bit contentious, but I've been dealing with a lot. My mother's packet, a lot of cancer in my writing. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, Kara. But I hope, you were able to just explore your story a little bit. And I feel like the thing with writing sprints is there is this focus a lot on word counts and like efficiency and maximizing your word count. And that's not always what you need or what your story needs at that point. I think it's about putting yourself kind of in that creative mindset of George.
I think for me, if I can get one line down during a 20-minute sprint, I'm a happy camper.
Awesome. All right. So I'm going to show the plant of the week or the flower of the week. It's just something we've been doing I have another show called Let's Write Scripts. And on that, I've been doing a sandwich of the week where I just show the best looking sandwich that I made. And on Let's Write Books, I've sort of been doing sort of like flowers from my neighborhood and my yard. And so this is just a little kind of creative break, a little moment of Zen. I actually have a little video here. These is African blue basil with some honeybees on it. So this is in my backyard. A pretty little flower just to kind of help us stay in the creative mind space. The African blue basil, I have some plant facts for you guys from my wife who planted this because I don't know anything about plants. It's a perennial as opposed to most basils, which are annuals, which means that their life cycle is that they die kind of every year and they reseed. But this has been living for 3 years, and it's great because we have all these honeybees buzzing around in my backyard, and we mostly use this to make pesto, which kind of has a little bit of a smoky taste to it. I haven't really added it to sandwiches, but we use it to make pesto. And so I don't know, it's very nice. I also just love going out there and just like hanging out with the bees. Anyway, so that's the plant of the week. Yes, savory. Yes, very savory. And those are beautiful. Anyways, so that is the plant of the week. George, what do you like you're in Maine. Are you in nature, or are you?
Yes, we are certainly in nature, right on the coast. Lots of beautiful walking paths. So we try and do that at least once a week, and it's cool to see. Everything's still barren right now, except for kind of like the evergreens and other beautiful kind of water loving plants. And so it's really cool to just be able to embrace and appreciate all that right now. And I'm anticipating in the next month or so, we're going to start to see other things filling in, which is exciting.
That's fantastic. Well, George, I know you have limited time with us. You have to get going. I want to thank you so much for being with us this morning. Do you have any final words of advice or encouragement for the writers who are watching us today?
Yeah, keep going. And, just as characters should have an internal motivation, we should have kind of a internal motivation, a desire to grow in our writing and in our lives. And so I like to find that the ways in which fantasy is an allegory for just my everyday life and writing in general. And I find that to be one of the more powerful aspects. So, I mean, thank you, Micah, for having me. Thank you, everyone, for indulging me. Go pre-order Bashir Botros and the Jewel of the Nile. It's on my website.
As a reminder, there's a link to George's website in the discussion in the description below. And George, I love what you said just right there. I feel like people have these dreams of writing a book or writing, and you get so fixated on that it becomes a thing, whether you as the writer and like your ability and your growing. And, if you are growing and developing like that, that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. All right, George. Well, hey, we will say farewell. And George, have a great week. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope we can have you on the show again.
Thanks, Micah. Thanks, everyone.
All right, see you, George. All right, we are going to do another writing sprint. We kind of doing 2 writing sprints today because we were talking with George, and what a fantastic chat. If you came in late, you can check the video. It'll be the same video afterwards, and I think we'll probably also edit that conversation into a separate video so you can check it out, because George was saying a lot of awesome stuff relevant to fantasy writing and all really all types of literature, novel writing with character and love some of the stuff he was saying in scene writing. All right, so we are going to do one more writing sprint. 25 minutes back on the clock. I'm going to play some music. We're going to dive into our books. If you have to leave during the sprint, no worries. Thank you so much for showing up and, giving yourself this time, to work on your novel, which is fantastic. And I hope that you guys do some more writing this week. As I mentioned, we have Let's Write Books next Monday. We're talking about stakes. And on this Wednesday, we're doing Let's Write Scripts. And you can join that as well. It's 1 p.m. Pacific on Wednesdays, and there's a link to that. You don't have to write a script there if you just want. You're a novel writer and you just want another time to write and hang out with writers. It's cool. Sometimes people are writing scripts here at Let's Write Books and books at Let's Write Scripts. And it's good. All right. I think that is it in terms of the announcements. So I'm going to play some music. I'm going to put the timer back up on the screen, and we're just going to get into our writing. And and again, if you have to leave, no worries. Say farewell. Let me know how the writing went. And if you stick around to the end, we'll say our final farewells. So I do it. Play some music here, and let's get into it. Let's do some writing, everybody. Glad you're all here. All right, everyone. That is the end of Let's Write Books for today. I hope you had a great time. George is a fantastic guest. If you missed the beginning, go back and watch the recording of this so you can check out everything that he said. You're not gonna want to miss that because it was fantastic. Thank you all for coming. I hope you got some great writing done. Please join me on Wednesday for Let's Write Scripts, Wednesday at 1 p.m. There's a link below. And next Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific for the next Let's Write Books, where we're going to be talking about stakes. I hope you all can make it. Just have a great week. Carve out some other time for your writing in the mornings or in the evenings or during the day, whenever you can. Give yourself the gift of writing. Until then, take it easy, everyone. Be kind to yourselves, and happy writing. I'll see you soon. All right, bye.